How much time do you spend thinking about time in your life? Do you think about it? Have you thought about how it impacts your world and your perception of what's happening and what's not happening? Our culture, Western culture, we could say, places more emphasis on time than anyone ever in existence. We have this obsession, and it's ever increasing. Can I tell you what I did last month? I started tracking my time. Not some of it, all of it. Every minute of January was tracked and categorized and logged. Now, I don't know if that's like obsessive or if I'm just trying to get a grasp on what's going on in my life and how I'm spending my time. But we have an endless amount of apps and productivity models and to-do lists and time management things. We have this huge emphasis on punctuality. Remember that moment in Aladdin and the bug whispers in his ear, punctuality. We have an obsession with all of these things. And it is kind of a new phenomenon, this time thing. We get obsessed with how long it's going to take us to download something. You don't know anything. It just puts that number there, and you go 8 minutes. Is that actually 8 minutes, or is that just a number that they're putting there? We have this obsession with time, and it has this huge effect on our life. Time is an experience thing. Actually, in one sense, we perceive our own time. Did you try to describe it to someone? How did you describe time? I have no idea. This is what's crazy about the human brain. I have no idea if how I perceive time is the same as how you perceive time. I do know that I'm late everywhere, and so I probably perceive time differently than you. And so a minute seems like a lot longer to me than it does to you because I can get more done in that 1 minute. Time is this really strange thing that happens that we can't quite explain, and we are completely obsessed with it. I like finding random things to listen to and just sort of making that the soundtrack of my day. A few weeks ago, that was Rent's soundtrack. And of course, the song Seasons of Love that is most known, 525,600 minutes. Yeah, now it's in your head forever. It doesn't go away. Just so you know, that doesn't go away. You're welcome. What I love about the song is this sort of movement between time as something that we can name and identify and count and measure, just like even names, inches or miles. Time is this thing that we measure, but at the same time, I'll try to stop that. At the same time, we can't measure it, and so we start talking, and the song flips between experiences, cups of coffee, or seasons of love, or this thing that we can't grasp. And so when we try to define time, we do that in different ways. Have you thought about God in relation to time? It's actually kind of traumatic how much time plays a role in the way we think about God. Many of the so-called church fathers put God outside of time. And what that means is, and we say things like God is omniscient, all-knowing, omnipresent, all-present, present everywhere, and omnipotent, all-powerful. And what that does to time and to God is that it takes God out of the scene, and then it says God knows what you're going to do next and what you're not going to do and everything else. And so then you have to go, well, don't I have choice in my life? And then you have to go, well, if God already knows, or if God's determined it, and we have this big debate in Christianity, whether God's determined things or whether we get to determine some of it ourselves, or whether the Spirit pushes us to make our own determinations, but it's still God pushing us. We have this huge, complicated mess, and it's all because we're trying to perceive how God understands time and how we understand God understanding time. In fact, we are so obsessed. We've constantly evolved time in a way to define it perfectly. Do you know how we keep time now? Does anyone know what this process looks like? The official time is kept now with a cesium atom. So cultures have counted time in hugely different ways. They've counted time with the cycle of cattle giving birth. They've counted time with moons. They've counted time with seasons. And of course, we count time by the sun, right? And by the Earth's rotation, more specifically in relationship to the sun. So that wasn't enough. Just so you know, that wasn't accurate enough to count the Earth's rotations. We actually use this cesium atom, and we watch how many times this atom vibrates or ticks or oscillates or something. And in every second, this atom, and this is the official time. If you look at a country's official time, it is based on this cesium atom, which ticks 9,162,631,770 times every second. That's how we keep time. We use that atom to keep time because the Earth's rotation actually isn't accurate enough. And so the cesium atom is so accurate that we have to use it. And then sometimes, do you remember the leap second earlier last year? Sometimes we have to add a leap second to keep pace with what the Earth is actually doing because it doesn't rotate precisely because the moon messes with its movement and the oceans shift, and as the ice caps melt, it actually is changing the speed of the orbit of the Earth, or the rotation of the Earth. You were all looking for that this morning. I can see that in your eyes. You thought, I really hope he tells us that the orbit or the rotation of the Earth fluctuates. This atom is more precise than the Earth. So if we just left it as counting by the atom, because that's the most precise way to do it, in 500 years, we would be, eating dinner in daylight and vice versa, and just it would do weird things. Only 1 second every once in a while. The cesium atom, your watch maybe loses a second or is off by a second every month or two. The cesium atom loses a second once every 100 million years or something like that. That's how precise we're measuring, and that's what is required here. Anyway, I know you were looking for all of that. So we have this dynamic between experiencing time and measuring time. And on the one hand, we want to measure everything and know it exactly. And on the other hand, we can't quite describe how we experience time. And we can't grasp how time functions. We can try to wrap our heads around it, but we can't quite grasp it. So who explained time when you described it to someone? Who did that with a measurement? Counting suns or moons, or only one person, or nobody did the experiment? That's fine. A few of you. How many of you used your own personal experience to measure time or to talk about time? A few. That's pretty interesting. This is the reality is we are experiencing different times, and it's not just perception. That's what's fun about this. It's not just perception. Before we get into more of the theological stuff, Einstein has done a lot of damage to our perception of time. Einstein actually, with his theory of special relativity, and I'm going to come back to why this is actually still important, just really wrecked our perception of time, because we think we can calculate, we think we know what's going on. But Einstein's theory suggests that time and space are connected. He refers to it as space-time. Most physicists refer to it also as space-time. Meaning, that if you move in space, it impacts your movement in time. That one follow? You follow that one? So, almost like if you're driving west, at 100 kilometers an hour. This is Brian Greene, I think, describes it this way. If you're driving west at 100 kilometers an hour, I don't know which way west is, just go with the direction of my hand here. And you're driving 100 kilometers an hour, and you turn northwest. We'll pretend again. This is not northwest. And you drive northwest at 100 kilometers an hour, right? You are no longer making as much distance west as you are straight, right? But you're still going 100 kilometers an hour. So Einstein's statement is you are moving and it impacts one another, just like you directionally when you turn course of path. You don't go as far west, even though you're putting as much energy into going 100 kilometers an hour. So what that means is, quite literally, as I walk across the stage, my movement in space affects my movement in time. You following this? It's good, because I'm not. And my body, not just my perception of time, but my body, the atoms in my body know that I am moving in space, and it is affecting the ticking of my internal clock. I don't know what you do with that, but it's pretty interesting, right? Now that's just a theory, right? But here's what we did in the 70s. We put a cesium atom clock on the ground, and we synced it with a cesium atom on an airplane with a clock, and we flew it around the globe, and it lost time because it's moving quickly in space. The atom knows it's moving, not just some sort of perceived motion that we think, oh, well, now that I'm moving, my body sort of thinks this. The atom, the ticking of your internal clocks down to the very microscopic level of your body knows that it's moving in space. It's pretty amazing. But I'll be honest, it is really difficult to put that into a theological kind of message or sermon. And I struggled a lot, not just with that, but wrapping your head around that. Let me tell you what that means, because this is what it means. According to Einstein, what this means is that time is just a fourth dimension that we experience laterally, right, or whatever. Just like we experience space. We can go any direction in the cosmos, and we know we can go any direction, right? Well, Einstein's theory says that it's not just that, it's that time is a fourth dimension, and in theory, we're just moving in one direction or another in this dimension. You ready for this? Okay, what that means to Einstein is that the past and the future are equally present as the now. Because it's all just a dimension of now. It's all real. And I don't know what to do with that, but I'll tell you, once you put God into that mix, then you have to go, well, is God outside of that timeline? And do I have any determination at all what happens to my life? So here's what we're going to do with this, because that is, most of you are glazed over at this point, and that's fine. I get it. But here's what all of this does for me, okay? I look at all of it, and it is complicated, and I love it, and it's fun, and it's interesting, and it's unique. But at the end of the day, I go, holy smokes. So everything is now, just experienced differently. And next year is just as now as this moment, just at a different dimension, at a different place in time. But time isn't real, it's all relative, the theory of relativity, right? Here's what it does for me, is it says, okay, what I know is that I experience now. And that distinction between whether we're measuring time or whether we're experiencing time or whether it is a perception, a perspective that we're trying to identify, what is this moment about? I have to throw out all of it, not scientifically, not mentally, just to say all of that puts me here right now. And whatever time does in whatever space-time thing, fabric of whatever it is, that puts me here right now to experience this moment. And I was immediately reminded once all of this clicked that I can't wrap this around some sort of theological tree, is that I think Ecclesiastes is talking about this. We sometimes toss it out like this vain king or rich ruler doesn't know the reality of the world or something like that. But he says everything is meaningless. He searches high and low. He takes pleasure in eating. He takes pleasure in money. He takes pleasure in everything that he can find and seeks out wisdom and seeks out pain. And everywhere he goes, he comes back to it and says, all of that is pointless, completely pointless. And I'll be honest, I've looked at it in the past and thought, this guy doesn't fit in my Bible. Doesn't fit in my Bible, doesn't fit in my theological framework, doesn't make sense to how I understand who God is. Something has meaning, right? But here's where I think he was coming from. He says, this is the message, smoke, nothing but smoke. There's nothing to anything, it's all smoke. I think Einstein might be in the same place. What's there to show for a lifetime of work, a lifetime of working your fingers to the bone? One generation goes its way, the next one arrives, but nothing changes. It's business as usual for old planet Earth. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, it does it again and again, the same old round. The wind blows south, the wind blows north, around and around and around it blows, blowing this way, then that, the whirling, erratic wind. All the rivers flow into the sea, but the sea never fills up. The rivers keep flowing to the same old place and then start all over and do it again. Everything boring, utterly boring. No one can find any meaning in it. That doesn't sound like scripture to me. It sounds like a philosopher trying to work out, what in the world are we doing here? And when I look at the ends of time and the beginnings of time and try to reconcile Einstein saying that they are equal in being now, sort of, I think, what in the world? Everything, the sun goes up and it comes down. But here's what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, what you have and what you experience, whether past or future, is not what matters. It's you experiencing right now and understanding the present as a perspective, as a perception of now, however you want to put that. Now is what you're experiencing. In fact, there's a newer theory of how all this works in terms of time. It's called the now theory of the universe, that actually says there is no future and there is no past. So they're kind of like one-upping Einstein. The me that's here right now is not the same me that's here now. Like, we're connected because of the past, but but this is the reality and this is it. And that puts you in this very moment without thinking, without letting something worry about tomorrow or desire for something greater or something more meaningful, but to just say, here I am right now. How can I experience this moment, this life, to hear, to feel, to know, to experience God? That's where Ecclesiastes is ultimately going. Everything is meaningless. But right now, you can feel and experience God. Jesus, I think, there's a guy, I don't really want to go far into this, but there's a guy named Peter Rollins. He's a philosopher of religion. I've read a few of his books, and I was just listening to him a couple of weeks ago connect Ecclesiastes and Jesus in terms of the nothingness moment. And you look at Jesus saying to teaching, and he says, you are worried about tomorrow. You are worried about what's coming. You are worried about, how am I preparing for this? How will I eat tomorrow? And he says, the birds and the lilies don't worry about how they eat or how they're going to be clothed. They just are. And there's a little bit of Ecclesiastes in Jesus at that moment saying, you don't need to worry about what's coming tomorrow. You need to be experiencing God right now in this moment. The future you, who knows? The past, who knows? But right now, you have an opportunity to open up your heart, your mind, your body, the atoms inside you to experience this moment. And that's what Jesus is saying about worrying about tomorrow. It's not about, well, should I not invest, or does that mean I don't need to go to school so that I can get a good job? It's not that kind of question. The question is about experiencing you, the world, God's creation, God's work, God's love right now. I don't know exactly how to think about space-time and the wreck that it does to my perception of what's happening. But I do know that the meaning and the words of that Seasons of Love song that pulls us out of the measuring time by minutes and days and daylights to the experience of sunsets and cups of coffee and moments of love and moments of community. That's what that song is. And ultimately, that's what Jesus is saying. Why are you worried about tomorrow? Let God enter your presence and your experience right now in this moment.